and we'll be getting a memo that it's getting live streamed, and this will also be recorded. Great. All right. Also be recorded. Great. 1 second here. All right. So thanks everybody for showing up this evening to the Susitna River Coalition's November Winter Speaker Series event. My name is Margaret Stern, and I am the Communications and Outreach Manager for the Susitna River Coalition. Before we get started, I would like to thank our generous sponsors with the Talkeetna Community Council and the Chase Community Council, as well as all of our generous donors for making events like this possible. So we are here today with Katelin Walczyk asking, how does our watershed inspire you and your creativity? So I am so excited that she's here. I love watching the art that comes out of Katelin's studio and to have a piece on the wall of our cabin. But beyond that, Katelin has her Bachelors in Fine Arts from the University of Wisconsin in drawing and photography. She has studied for 3 terms in San Bernardino and began merging the 2 mediums of drawing and photography during her time there. Now she lives in the Talkeetnas, where she focuses on landscapes, natural resources, and the human experience, and showing that through her art. She's the co-owner of Lofted Acre Studios with her partner, Matt, and there they focus on turning timber into lumber and lumber products and creating from their spaces there. So I'll pass it over to Katelin, and she can give us a talk on her work. Thank you, Katelin.
Thanks, Margaret. Yeah, this is awesome that you put together this series. I'm really excited. And I also want to thank everybody who is tuned in right now. I'm going to start out today by telling a story about a shrew. So a few years ago, I woke up to a ringing phone call around 11 p.m. in late winter. It was a roadkill moose. I don't think I need to go into details about my attitude when waking up to this particular phone call, getting dressed in several layers, grabbing a headlamp, and getting ready to head out for a 45-minute drive one way to load a huge animal onto a trailer with one other person and a come-along, and then bring it home, try to get some sleep, and wake up for my 6 a.m. alarm to get to work the next day. So if anybody here is tuned in who is not familiar with the roadkill list in Alaska, it's a program where you can receive a call. You have to be willing to receive this call anytime, day or night, and travel to within 30 miles of your home address to pick up an animal that's been hit by a car and salvage the meat off of it. And as you can imagine, something as big as a moose could potentially have 60 to 200 pounds of meat that's not damaged after being hit by a car. So it's actually a really great resource for us Alaskans. So anyways, back to the story. I tried to push all of this negativity out of my head because, you know, it's a good resource and I believe in it. And so I walk out my front door, you know, dressed in my insulated bibs and muck boots, and I'm ready to go. And I look down to my left, and there's an empty 5-gallon bucket, and inside of it there was the corpse of a tiny shrew. So the intensity of dying animals, and they're biologically far superior to my species in surviving Alaskan winters, began to course through my veins. And yes, I've had some profound moments on, you know, flying over the Alaska range in a small plane, or, you know, floating down a river, or on an ocean on the ocean in a boat. But this moment really stuck with me for some reason. And I think that this moment of mortality and sorrow for 2 animals that ranged in size from just a few ounces to over 1,000 pounds was that, like, it was that moment of realizing that like every life is important, and it's these tiny little brief moments that actually bring people together and bring them down to earth. Not everyone climbs Denali and has that beautiful, profound moment on the top. So that's one reason that I make art, is because I want to be able to relate to everybody and share like the really beautiful, tiny moments in life. So as far as materials, I primarily use pencil, charcoal, pastels, mineral pigments, pens, any mark making materials that cross my path. I've even put like egg whites on paper and, dust or shavings from burnt wood. But my very favorite way to make art for the last several years has been simply pencil on paper. And I think that desire came from the need to create art throughout the transition of moving from Wisconsin to Alaska and having really limited time and resources and space. I lived in a travel trailer for a year and a half, and I had a like 1 by 2 foot studio, I called it, which was awesome. And the access of just a pencil and a paper will always be there. I'll always be able to go there if everything else in life falls apart. And I think that simplicity has a lot of beauty in it. So a couple pieces that I created when I first moved here, and I was just creating pencil on paper. I'm going to share my screen now. This is one of them. And it's entitled Camper. And it's that travel trailer that I was talking about when I first lived here with my partner. It's got a lot of classic Alaska stuff going on. There's this lean-to built off the camper, some solar panels hooked up and leaning against like a water barrel, a stack of tires over in the corner. And if anybody here is a friend of ours or a family member, they know about the red car that I actually labeled way in the background here. It's kind of a legend in this town. So another piece that I created in the beginning is this one. And this one is entitled Scammon Bay Moss Clump. And this is actually the one that Margaret purchased a print of and has in her cabin. So thanks, Margaret. She's one of the early supporters. So yeah, the color you see on this image was added probably a year or two after the original pencil drawing was made. And the intention with this drawing was to simply, take my super basic tools and make something, like put a lot of time into something and, see where I could go with the simplicity of a pencil and paper. So a couple of materials that I have used that are specific to the Susitna watershed are mineral pigments, as well as spruce and birch wood. And these are, this is a pin that I made out of local white spruce. It was made probably in the last 6 months, and I'll talk more about that later on. So this is a picture of my mineral pigment palette. So I wanted to bring some color to my pencil drawings. And I decided to go out for walks for about a week's time. And each day I picked a different color of rocks to look for. And if the hue in the rock was pungent enough to potentially make a pigment out of it, I would bring them home and begin breaking them down, starting with a sledgehammer and working with progressively smaller tools to turn the rocks into as fine of a dust as I could. And when I mix that dust with water and a product called gum arabic, which is just like a fixer, what helps it fix to paper, or I would use egg whites from my chickens. I made pigments and paints out of them. So over the years, I've supplemented some of these more subdued earthy hues with color pastels that I purchased. And I wanted to make some brighter colors. So they've been altered definitely over the years. And you'll notice that in some of my artwork that I'll show. But whenever I look at the rocks or observe different pockets of soil that are revealed when digging or moving dirt, I think about the ancient history of this location. And I feel like that's a really great reason to represent our specific place and time through art making. The process of drawing over the past 5 years, it began with challenging myself to put a lot of time and attention into one small work that emphasized details. And it was always about something that I really enjoyed or a piece of beauty that I saw and I took a photo of in Alaska. So I have a passion for photography, and I also really enjoy the visual qualities that come from the photography equipment and some of the quirks of photography equipment and the processing. So right now I'm building a dark room. It's actually in the corner over there. It's not finished yet, but it is kind of dark. And it's taken a lot of years to get to this point. So with the drawings in the meantime, I was really just attempting to access that experience of, sort of printing onto a physical surface. And I looked at hundreds of photos for inspiration and actually drew like photorealistic images from them. But beyond the subject matter of the photo, I'm going to share my screen again and show you a few examples of the details that I'm talking about in the printing process. So this is a photo that I found in an antique store in Alameda, California, I believe. The photographer is unknown. There's nothing written on the back, but I was really drawn to it for both its composition as well as the light leaks onto the film in the corners over here. These are the kinds of things, these light leaks and this little printing error up in the corner. These are the kind of things that tell a story about who was taking the picture. And to me, that's kind of the most interesting part of photography. So I might look at it while making a drawing and borrow some of the details. I might create like this light, subtle shading up here that defines the top border of the frame and the paper that it's exposed to. This image is a photo that I took and developed in 2013. So talking about the errors in the printing process, this negative actually got wrinkled in my backpack. And when I discovered that, I was actually really excited. And because at this point in my photography career, I had discovered that the most interesting pictures I could make were due to flaws or interruptions in the process of making them. As you can see, what might be the focal point of the picture, which would be this ladder here, is heavily blurred out. And the seemingly mundane areas, like this small space underneath the slide here, or this little patch of grass up in the corner, which is really focused, are brought to the viewer's attention. So I was getting what I was going for here. And my intention is to allow the viewer's mind to wander and notice something that might not otherwise be seen. And I'll show one more picture. I do view film and digital photography as completely different categories, in my opinion, but I like to notice and draw qualities that are found in each of them. So this next picture was taken with my Samsung smartphone in Hatcher's Pass. And what interested me in particular when I took it was the sunlight that was behind the clouds and kind of creating this like shrouded sun look. Kind of a good memory, because as soon as we finished our climb and got to the top and we were about to ski down, it cleared up, and it was a nice run to make that day. So I guess this might be a good time to pause if there are any questions.
One question that was coming through on Facebook is, how do you anticipate your work changing as you gain more access to space to work in, like the darkroom?
Yeah, I definitely see, and this is kind of sad for me to think about, but I do see my drawing becoming less common, less frequent, because I think once I get in there and witness the magic of, developing, it's going to be a lot of fun. But I definitely don't want to forget about the time and details that I've focused on over the last 5 years, and it will probably influence how I make photos now, and that will change.
Cool. Yeah, and another question is, the mineral pigments, what has been the success with kind of getting those to really bind? Have you noticed that different pigments were more permanent? And how do you seek those out again? Like, are you able to find the same sources again and again?
Oh yeah, that's a really good question. I'm actually still using some of the original ones that I made probably 3 years ago. So that would be a really good challenge, is to try to, match a color that I found. And as far as finding a good binding material, egg whites or albumin is kind of a traditional photography fixative. So when I learned that you could use them to fix pigments onto paper, I found that I got really excited about that, because it's related to photography. And I think you have to mix the egg white with a little bit of water. And I actually haven't tried just straight egg white, because I think it would harden and crack and fall off. And the water sort of makes it bind better to the paper. The other product that I'm talking about sort of turns the pigment into a watercolor. So it's just like a powder. It's called gum Arabic. I think I ordered it off of Amazon. And yeah, you just mix that in with your water and the pigment dust. And that's the one that I use more often.
Well, when you were first coming up with that technique, did you have to do a bunch of experimentation first before you put it onto something that you'd worked a long time on? Or did you go for it and put it on something you'd been working really hard on prior?
Yeah, totally. That's a good question too. I remember doing like 4x4 squares of different types of paper that I had on hand, and just doing like a wash of color. And it was more for the color product than the quality. And I knew that it would cause the paper to wrinkle a little bit, but I kind of just went for it, to be honest. I think I was a lot more experimental at that point, where now I'll think about my drawings a little more ahead of time and run more tests.
Cool. And then the other thing that I'm curious about is, when you put so much physical labor, like starting out with a sledgehammer and then moving forward, does that make you does it seem like more precious a material? Are you kind of hoarding it for the right project, or are you going, or are you really just using it all?
Absolutely. Yeah. I use it sparingly. And I think the other side of that is, I had done work in black and white for so long that I was really uncomfortable with color. And so choosing these pigments felt comfortable, because they were natural, like from the area that I'm making art about. And they're really subdued. And yeah, it's like, oh, here we go, color,
Cool.
Yeah,
Well, that's all the questions that I'm seeing right here. So I'm sure there'll be
awesome.
more popping in. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, guys. So yeah, I will pick up where I left off. My work soon evolved from single image scenes to collages or montages of different pictures. And looking back, I think that I felt that the single image compositions, they were really good for documentation. And a lot of them had like a great wall hanging quality, something that would be presentable in a hotel room. You know, it had some visual beauty, but it wasn't quite cutting it for what I was going for, which is a visceral perspective on life, something that is not very graspable by logic, and it has a lot more to do with how you feel when you're experiencing something. So the first one, or one of the first ones, I guess, that I made with this in mind is this one. And this one is called A Young Lofted Acre. Lofted Acre Studios is the business that I own with my partner. And there's a lot going on, but I think this image kind of represents it. So it's a montage of photos taken within maybe a year or year and a half of first moving onto the property where we are. So there's a lot going on. It's winter in some parts, it's summer in some parts. There's a garden here in the corner, a stack of pallets, dogs running around. There's tracks in the snow from a vehicle, a couple roadkill moose bones, some dirt work. There's the red car again. An image of our camper, solar panels, oops, even an outhouse with a little roll of toilet paper. Yeah, it was just kind of seeing what I could do with a lot of different pictures and putting them together to make an interesting composition that wasn't too confusing, but it held the viewer's attention a little more, and it encapsulates more of a feeling than just a document. I wanted to share some of the mysticism that I find in the world. So I really wanted to push the viewer to access a new way of thinking. And one example, and this is a topic that I make a lot of art about, is skiing. So I love to ski, both alpine and Nordic. It's a great place to be doing it here in the Susitna watershed. And I really wanted to make a drawing that showed what a skier might feel or imagine or think about throughout their life, and not only when they're skiing, but when they're daydreaming about skiing while they're at work. So this particular subject is something I return to often, and I'm going to show you a couple pieces and tell you about them now. This one is entitled Spring Skiing, and you can see that the composition combines spring and winter scenes, local plants, that cloud shrouded sun that I get really excited about up in the corner here. And there are also some invented elements, such as the female figure that's built out of various patterns, and her head sort of becomes one with the treescape in the background. She's using her body to access a place of really high energy. And judging by her stance, she's about to tap into some major potential. She's on a downward slide, and she's crossing a threshold of some kind, and that's signified by this red rope here. So I've done a lot more ski themed drawings, and I think it's important to talk about that no matter what kind of skier somebody is or what their skill level is, they're out there doing it because it's fun and it's rewarding, and it takes them somewhere where they might not otherwise get to go. And that could be physically, mentally, or even emotionally. And in the last image that I drew, you might even argue spiritually. So my grandparents on my mom's side played a big part in teaching me how to ski in Wisconsin and Upper Michigan. And they always encouraged it, as well as the old-fashioned lesson of working hard and playing hard. And I think I apply that to my life as well and my art. So yeah, when I learned that my grandfather was developing dementia, it hit me really hard. And I always looked up to him as an outdoorsman, a steward of the land, and a really great skier that just loved the sport. So those qualities I've carried with me, and I started thinking about the experience of losing memory, and I grasped for the pleasures of life that don't require memory. So I kept thinking about sensory experiences, and of course that brought me back to skiing. So I made another drawing about it. And it is this one. And it is called Memory, for lack of a better title. And I used several images from skiing here in this region. And I also invented some parts of it to create a sensory memory landscape. It depicts the physiology of being a warm, active body, noticing its own heartbeat, creating a ripple in the cold, quiet air around you while viewing a cloud-shrouded, warmly hued sun, which you don't really feel heat from, but looking at the sun makes you feel warm. That light source creates shadows and highlights along a mountain or hill, and you are reminded of the basic energy you have from being elevated above your normal livelihood, free to slip along through the pale scene as you please. It makes me ponder whether building up more and more of these smile-inducing moments over the years will provide some kind of bliss retirement fund that can be pulled from when our bodies become less able to do the work. So I scratched the surface on one topic that I make drawings about in an attempt to explain some of the decisions that I consider, or some things that I think about when I make drawings about other things. So other topics that you might see in my work are local plants, other recreational sports like rafting, and human relationships with resources. And there's an equal amount of thought that goes into each of these different topics. One of them where the material and the subject matter overlap is the work that I do with local beetle-killed spruce wood. And first I'll show a drawing. This drawing is called Trees and How They Employ Us. My partner Matt and I moved to Alaska and the Talkeetna area in 2016. Watching the spruce trees around us turn from green to purple to brown was a very loud call for us to utilize a resource. We recognized that the dying trees were a resource with an expiration date, and we developed this sort of obligation to utilize as many of them as we could within our means. So by the use of different tools and equipment of evolving sophistication, we have turned a lot, I would guess around 1,000 or more of trees into lumber for building projects. And it didn't take us long to realize their beauty, age, and value. So this drawing is a fusion of an undisturbed forest and a human standing on a seemingly precarious platform, in a way carrying the weight of some of the rafters that you see, which are each decorated with patterns. I guess it's almost like an ambiguous self-portrait of an artist attempting a life balance aiming to carry the weight of different types of craft and responsibility. And in the processing of all those trees, it's easy to imagine that many interesting pieces of wood were saved and set aside to be put to use into something more creative. So these are an example of some of the work we do with the wood directly. And I have to credit my partner for these. He designed this pair of earrings in particular. I also made some beads out of the spruce wood. And I also began to make pins, and this is kind of when I first started drawing on wood. And I can pause again here if there's any more questions that came up.
So one question that we got, or that you got, was, when you're walking through the forest, you might see a piece of wood and you're like, oh, that would be a great X. Is that similar to your process with that? Or do you more, have an idea for something that you're going to create with wood and then find the piece for it? Or does the piece find you?
I think it's more so the former. So, and it's more so in the processing of the wood than walking through the forest. That does happen occasionally, but so we have a sawmill, and for example, I'm offloading boards. Sometimes Matt and I will like see something after a board is like pulled off and the wood is revealed, and we'll just like look at each other and we're like, yeah, that's not going in a wall or on a roof. Like we're gonna cut that piece out and it's gonna be an earring, or it's gonna be a serving platter, or a spoon or something interesting. Yeah.
And then it also seems like the one piece where the person is standing on the platform, it almost looks like there's that solar flare in that piece too. Does that come up a whole lot in your work?
I do. Yeah, I think so. So that piece, I can show it again. The title is Trees and How They Employ Us. And then I always have in parentheses, like I had this in a show at the hangar in Talkeetna. And in parentheses, it's illuminated by a 120 volt sun. So it's talking about solar energy and that resource. But I do have a lot of fun with working with light sources and the viewer. It's definitely the focal point in this piece.
Cool. That's all the questions for right now. So I'll pass it back to you.
Awesome. So yeah, as I said, the wooden pins were a segue into some of my more current pieces, where I'm drawing straight onto wooden slabs and exploring different mark making. And when I'm drawing on a piece of wood, one of the most interesting things to me is that it's obviously a very different surface than paper. And when I first started drawing on wood, I was like, oh, I don't really like this. It has a texture that I don't know how to deal with. And then I realized that it's a surface that was created by something that was alive. So that like made me want to keep doing it. It has a story just like a photo does. And then the other interesting thing about drawing on the wooden slabs is that they're becoming a little more sculptural or three-dimensional. They're coming off the wall a little bit and entering the space of the viewer. And you have to look at the edges of a piece and consider if you're going to leave it blank and let the viewer look at the beauty of the wood, or if you're going to add like a pattern or keep your drawing going around that corner. So I started to consider some of these things, and I will show again what I did with some of them. Oh, here's like kind of a group of a few different wood slab pieces. So here is one edge treatment that I did. It's just like a pencil ombre effect with a little pastel color on the edge there. That is not a mineral pigment. I think it would be pretty hard to come up with something quite so pungent there. And here's another edge treatment that I did. So yeah, I'm having a lot of fun exploring drawing on the wood slabs. Okay, so to kind of close out, I just want to talk about how I'm developing my new body of work right now. And the main focus that I am emphasizing is patterns, because I'm recognizing a lot of patterns in life, and really art is just an observation of life. So one thing that I'm not allowing myself to do in developing patterns is to create like a stencil and just keep tracing it over and over, because I don't think that's quite what I'm trying to exemplify. So to understand that choice a little better, I want to talk about wood heat, which is something that a lot of us are really familiar with in the Susitna watershed and Alaska. So every year, or maybe every other year, we go through this laborious task of sourcing logs, bucking them up into wood stove size pieces, splitting them, stacking them. Everybody's got a different method and different tricks and tips that they've learned throughout the years of doing it to make it efficient and make it worth their time. And so it becomes sort of like an annual pattern in our life. And we know that we have to do it over and over and over, because the wood that we put up is only going to get us so far. So I started thinking about this when we were stacking wood a couple of weeks ago. Like, is this like, what is the value of this? You know, this time next year, I might be doing it again. And I'm like, does that make it more or less valuable? And I hope that through the process of creating patterns and like focusing on paying attention to these things, that I'll be able to answer some of those questions. And also it's somewhat of a meditative process to come up with a pattern and keep drawing it over and over. But I didn't want to do the stencil because I felt like that's like the easy way out. You're not really learning through the process. You're not like, oh, I can do this better next time by changing this a little bit. So I wanted the image to have like a life and a breath that isn't always repetitive and a carbon copy of the previous. And I'll just show, actually I have this piece sitting right next to me. I found a concrete form board in our yard with a bunch of screw holes in it. I think it has a really interesting surface. It's been used several times. It has a nice patina from being weathered. It's store-bought lumber, so that, you know, is talking about a different topic. And I'm using a lot of construction imagery to create my patterns. And I'm going to add a lot of color to this one. So it hasn't gotten there yet, but this is the piece right now. And yeah, can't see much detail on the screen, but I guess it's something to look forward to. So that's all I have.
Awesome. It's really fun to see the progression, and thanks for taking us through that.
Yeah.
I'm also curious, we have this these wooden products. It's this, you know, especially the spruce, when you look at those growth rings, they're so ancient. And what is that like putting pencil on something like that? And how do you fix it if you do fix it?
Yeah. A lot of people say, oh, you should do wood burning. And there are several reasons that I haven't done that yet, and I might, but I love the simplicity, the accessibility of a pencil, and yeah, I'm trying to think of the original question.
I guess like in for something so like old and ancient,
Yeah.
there's almost, when we talk about the beetle kill, there's kind of a rush
Yeah.
to get it taken care of so that it's still usable. And it's almost like there's this thought that goes into the piece, and it's this beautiful pencil work. And it's so interesting to put pencil on this thing because it almost mimics kind of this, like the idea
Oh,
almost mimics like, oh, we got to deal with this.
yeah.
Does that make sense?
Like it's
Kinda,
a
kinda like,
faster process, or like
yeah. And
sometimes
is
even,
that true?
yeah, sometimes even like the pencil marks will, I like looking at it will get confused if it's a pencil mark or if it's a mark that, was created by the growth of the tree. So it's kind of fun to interact with the marks that are already on the wood in that way. And yeah, you have to have a reverence for the material, regardless of the fact that I have, how many hundreds of board feet like on the property. There are moments like when you slow down and draw on it, that's when you realize like what it actually is and how long it's been around. And yeah, there's so many things that you could talk about with the spruce, and like the dead ones either rotting or becoming part of the earth again, or being part of the destruction of a wildfire, which then brings new life. It's a real big cycle. And I like the idea of bringing it into my art, even though that was never the intention in the first place when we decided to start processing the wood. But however many hundreds of hours next to a mill, eventually you just start thinking like, how would a mark be applied to this, and how can the artist touch have an effect on like what it is and how people view it.
Cool. We have a question in the chat, which is, do the seasons inspire your work, and how do they also affect your work?
I was originally pushed to use color. I talked a little bit earlier about how color was scary to me, but winter in Alaska pushed me to use color, which is probably surprising to some people that haven't spent a lot of time in Alaska in winter, because you would think, oh, it's all just white. But the sky, as you know, is just incredible to look at every day, and it's never the same. So winter pushed me to use color. And I think in springtime, I never am not in awe that springtime is happening. And I'm looking at the tiny plants that are starting to grow out of the patchy snow-covered ground. And yeah, I love to incorporate plants in my work. So that's an inspiring part of the seasons. And as far as like method goes, I can foresee being in the dark room and a lot in winter in the future because it's dark out anyways. And sometimes you're missing out on like a moonlight ski, but a lot of times, you'd just be sleeping or hanging out inside or whatever. So.
And then so a lot of your drawings are really focused on, or a few of your drawings are focused on some smaller scale items like the moss piece, for example. Is that based on memory, or are things like that based on photographs that you've taken or working outside?
Yeah, they're very much based on photographs. I think that a lens can have a huge effect on what something actually looked like. And I think that that's really interesting. So I'm definitely drawing from photos almost all the time. In an example such as the moss drawing, there's a lot of really tiny details, and I'm not looking at I'm not like counting, oh, how many like spores are on top of this, piece of moss. I'm not doing that, but I'm definitely looking at the marks and the shadows and the highlights, and just the way the wind is blowing grass, and it all has to kind of match, and your light source and all this. So
Cool. And then on your drawings on pieces of wood, do you have an idea of what you want to draw on a specific piece, or do you start with an idea and then transfer it to a piece of wood, or do you see a piece of wood and then that inspires you to create something? Like which comes first, I guess?
I think that the piece of wood would inspire the image choice, unless a lot of times when I'm out skiing or working or whatever, hiking, I'll take a picture that I'm like, the purpose of this picture is to draw it later, because I'm really interested in that horizon line or that shadow. But most of the time with the wood slabs, I'm like noticing a knot and how it could interact with like the sunlight or the horizon line.
Interesting. Cool. And then when you were talking about losing memory and skiing, and muscle memory, is that drawing process for you a muscle memory process as well? Like, is that something that you just kind of viscerally know?
Ooh, that's interesting to think about. I haven't really thought about that, but it must be, because what I was talking about with drawing on wood, and when I first started to do that, and how I really didn't like it because I had to like stop and be more conscious about what my hand and the pencil was doing. So I would think that drawing, is a muscle memory kind of a thing, as long as you're doing it enough, right?
Right. And then another question came in about those pieces of wood. Are you prepping them at all? Like, are you sanding them down? Are you working with them raw? How do you prep them for your work?
Yeah, I really began by thinking they needed to have this really smooth, perfect, beautiful surface. But as I showed you a minute ago or a couple minutes ago, I purposely chose, this form board that's got screw holes in it, and it's cracking in half here. And there's like dents from missing the screw and like hitting it with the drill, and there's a lot going on. So I think I'm shifting on that right now, and drawing on the wood is pretty new to me. So there's a lot of room for change, but I'm definitely seeing myself being more interested in a piece of wood that has a story, rather than something that I've prepared so, perfectly. And that's a little bit boring to me.
Yeah. With the beetle-kill spruce, you're talking about patterns coming out. A lot of those beetle-kill trees have those lines in the wood where the larvae were. Has that been integrated into your work at all? I kind of saw that, I think, on on the platform piece.
Yeah, I have a piece right here. This is actually a drawing of being on a raft on the Susitna River. And there were 2 little beetle-kill holes in it, or spruce bark beetle holes in it. And I filled them with okay, this is kind of weird. Some egg white that I was using to create that fixative. Like, it sat in my studio in a jar for a really long time, and it crystallized almost. So I filled those holes with the crystallized egg whites. I don't know how I feel about that. I haven't done it since, but there's definitely a way to interact with those marks, and hopefully I'll figure it out.
That's cool. I really like that. Like the 3-dimensional aspect of it, almost even more.
Yeah.
Where it's the wood piece, but then it pops out a little bit more.
Yeah, and it sparkles. I mean, who doesn't like a little bling, right?
Totally. Well, that actually brings up another question. How did you start making the wearables? Like what kind of pushed you to make wearables like pins and jewelry, the earrings and beads? What was that transition like?
I have to be honest and say that Matt really was the driver of starting with the earrings. It all kind of evolved from there. I used to actually make paper earrings. I don't know if anybody viewing remembers those. I sold them in a couple bazaars, but the nice thing about the wood is it's a little more classy, and you can still draw on it and make it unique, and it's still really light. The nice thing about the paper earrings was how light they were, and the dried beetle-kill spruce wood is extremely light. So yeah, he definitely began doing that, and then I was like, oh, we could do pins and beads too, and I kind of took that part on.
Cool. That's awesome. Well, does anybody else have any more questions before we wrap up here? Let's see. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention really quick is it's really cool to see in your drawings all of the detail, and how do you decide kind of what to focus into or focus on, like the toilet paper roll, like all these little details that are in there. I'm because I'm assuming not all of them are in there. So what are, how do you pick? Yes.
Right. Yeah. I would have to go back to the photography topic to answer this question as well, because I think maybe everyone can relate to this and maybe nobody can, but sometimes like you take a picture of something kind of lame and it's all about like the lighting at that moment and like what's around it, and you're like, this is a beautiful picture, but it's of like something like maybe even a piece of trash, like it's not like a beautiful item, but the picture is beautiful. So I'm really choosing from photos that I've taken and picking out those little qualities that make it interesting or were the reason that I took the photo.
And then Corinne and Clay ask, what's your favorite thing to do with wood? What's your favorite thing to make?
I'll have to say shelves and handles for their stair railing for their house.
Cool. Well, is there anything else that you would like to add, Katelin? Or any more questions from anyone?
I think I'll just finish by showing a drawing that I made of a moose carcass to kind of bring it full circle and return to the dead animal concept. So thanks everybody, and gotta find that moose carcass for y'all.
And while she, oh, nice. And I would also like to add that I dropped Katelin's websites, both for Lofted Acre Studios and for her personal site, into the chat there, and it's on Facebook, so you can check out her work. You can also find her on Instagram at Katelin Walczyk and at Lofted Acre Studios. You can find her work at the Dancing Leaf Gallery and Mimi's House of Cheese, both in downtown Talkeetna. And you will be able to find to purchase her cards, poster prints, and jewelry, and her partner Matt's pottery at the Holiday Mercantile located above the Y in Talkeetna, starting this Friday. So you should check out her work and support her and Matt. And I'll again pass that back to you, Katelin, but thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Thanks everyone for
really
joining.
fun. Yeah, it's been really fun to kind of get a glimpse into your mind and your process. So thank you.
You got it.
And we'll be having 2 more events in this series. There'll be another event next week, which is a virtual paint and sip. There'll be trivia and prizes as part of that. You can register up until this Friday for that event, and paint kits will be picked up in downtown Talkeetna. And we'll also be having another artist talk with Katie Ryder, who is a pilot and journalist and painter. So that will be another fun look into creativity in the watershed. But I'm so happy that Katelin was here to kick us off here for the series. So thanks. All right. Have a good night, everybody. Thanks for joining. Bye, Caitlin.
Bye.